how's it going everyone? It is Skullzi here with the latest and the greatest gaming news. Today I want to talk about some possible new information regarding Starfield and what the main theme of the game will be. Bethesda Game Studios has said numerous times in the past that when they develop a new game, they always approach it with a certain theme in mind and try to keep everything in the game aligned with that theme. And thanks to the help of the community and their efforts to dig up anything that they could find that might have anything at all to do with Starfield, I believe I have a pretty good idea exactly what the theme of Starfield will be. First off, I want to give a huge shout out to Majid, who sent me a message on Twitter and brought this information to my attention. This is something I don't believe I've actually seen before. If I have, it was a long time ago and I totally forgot about it by now. So thank you Majid for the keen eyes, and this information is from about 10 years ago, before Starfield was probably even in pre-development. And as I have proven in previous videos here on the channel, even as far back as 10 years ago, Todd Howard had Starfield on his mind, as Starfield has actually been his dream project, the game that he has been wanting to make for a long time. Back in 2010 we had no idea what Starfield was though, but looking back, knowing what we do now, we can see some clear signs that Starfield was on its way. Now this information actually comes from an interview between Kotaku and Todd Howard way back in January of 2010. Todd Howard called into Kotaku's talk radio podcast and brought up a possible Star Trek game that was briefly considered back then, as Bethesda actually owned the rights to develop Star Trek games, as they acquired the Star Trek license shortly after Activision owned the rights to it but allowed it to expire. This game would have been set in a classic era of the Star Trek universe, and Todd Howard was confident that they would have been able to get William Shatner to even do voice work for the game, as he has done work for Bethesda in the past. But now this is where things get interesting. The Star Trek game never actually came out because Bethesda Game Studios had other things going on at the time. They never even actually started to develop this Star Trek game, and they say the other things they had going on at the time was Fallout, and I mean, even though that's true, yeah, sure, whatever Todd, you decided to not make a space game because you were working on a post-apocalyptic one. Well, this sort of made sense at the time. We now know the truth. We now know the more likely reason that the Star Trek game was never developed was because Todd Howard actually had his own ambitions and plans to make a space game. And that game was to be an open-world space RPG game that, like I said, has been Todd Howard's dream project. Ever since Todd Howard got into the gaming industry, he has been wanting to make a game like Starfield, and if he was finally able to get his shot at making a space RPG, he'd want it to be set in his own universe, be his own creation, and not be entirely based off of an already existing, even though successful franchise like Star Trek. I am sure he convinced ZeniMax to allow him the chance to finally make his own version of a space RPG, whilst turning down their suggestion to make this Star Trek game, and we all know that space RPG would eventually be Starfield. He tried to make a game like this back in like the early 90s and late 80s, but it almost bankrupted Bethesda because at the time his ambition for that game was way too grand for gaming technology at the time. This game was called The 10th Planet, and I covered it in previous videos here on the channel. But back to this situation, whatever Todd Howard said, it must have been good because it convinced ZeniMax to not even follow their ambitions for the Star Trek game and eventually allow Bethesda Game Studios to make Starfield, because as we know now, shortly after this 2010 interview, Bethesda Game Studios actually started up the pre-development stage for Starfield. So although we didn't know it back then at the time, this 2010 interview was one of the first hints that we got that Starfield was on its way. And there is actually one final piece of information that we can take away from this interview. As I mentioned earlier in the video, Bethesda Game Studios approaches every game they develop with a certain theme in mind, Starfield included, and I believe Todd Howard mentions exactly what this theme would be for Starfield in this interview. He mentioned he wanted a big Star Trek RPG game where you can go out and explore the universe. Now let's substitute the words Star Trek for space and you get exactly what the theme will be for Starfield. I am almost certain of it. Going out into the great unknown and exploring space, which sounds amazing, and it is pretty clear that Todd Howard actually meant a space RPG game in general, and not specifically Star Trek when he said this in the interview, as I am certain he never actually meant to even develop the Star Trek game in the first place, as he has clearly been adamant about wanting to make his own space RPG game with its own universe long before this 2010 interview even occurred. So although this information isn't from a brand new interview, it is pretty interesting how something from almost 10 years ago can tell us something as important as what the main theme for Starfield will actually be. And to be honest, the theme seems to actually fit perfectly, as what better theme could there be for a space RPG game other than exploring the great unknown? This makes me wonder though a bit as to what direction will Bethesda take when it comes to space exploration. Will we be exploring the ruins of ancient space spacefaring civilizations while traveling all alone, never actually coming across any living alien races? Or will we not be the only ones making this journey, actually having a colony coming along with us? Will there be alien races we'll discover and come across, make first contact with, get into combat with? I mean, obviously there has to be some sort of conflict in the game in order for there to be combat, and I highly doubt there won't be any combat in Starfield. And despite what some other channels suggest, Todd Howard never actually came out and said whether or not aliens would actually be in the game, but Bethesda Game Studios has shown us in their previous games that they've always been interested in having a diverse set of races one way or another in their game universes, and I'm sure Starfield will be no exception to this rule. That's it for today's video though. As always, what I want to know is, what do you have to say about all of this? Let me know what you think about this interview down in the comments below, and if your comment wins the internet, I make it featured in the future video. Be sure to like the video if you enjoy the content. It helps the channel out a lot more than you might think, and if you want to stay in the know when it comes to the latest and the greatest gaming news, then consider subscribing to the channel and turn notifications on. Follow me over on Twitter for the latest channel updates. Come over to the official Skullzi Discord chat server, where there is always an awesome and active conversation and some speculation taking place. If you want to get some awesome Skullzi merchandise, then be sure to check out Loot Drop over on Teespring. And if you want to have your hand in providing future videos and getting access to unique and awesome awards, then consider subscribing to the community over on Patreon or joining the channel here on YouTube as an exclusive channel member. Links for all of these awesome things are down in the description below, and as always, thank you for watching. Be sure to tune in next time when someone finds an interview from 15 years ago when Todd Howard says exactly what Starfield is going to be. Imagine that.
It just works.